Dan Luzadder. He was an award-winning journalist. He's been in the newspaper journalism business for a long time. I believe you've made some documentary films also.
I'm working on a documentary right now on a cold case, series of cold case murders.
Okay. And when did you start in journalism, Dan?
I drew my first paycheck when I was 17 for being an editor on a small newspaper, and by the time I was 19, I was covering cops for a very blue collar daily in my hometown.
Yeah.
So I've been doing it ever since.
Wow, wow, wow. And I know as an old-time journalist, when you watch the television news today or read the papers, that you're really shocked by how everything is so upfront and honest and factual, correct?
Yeah, we're developing a stunning record for accuracy here and unbiased reporting, right? No, it's much different than it used to be. My frame of reference is institutional reporting. I grew up in newsrooms. I'm quite literally grew up in newsrooms, and I've watched over the more recent term the decline in that sort of institutional structure that really informed reporting and helped us do good, accurate reportage on what was really going on in communities. So that's changed a lot. It's been a tremendous loss, and I think it's affected journalism across the board.
Well, I totally understand what you're talking about. I started in a television newsroom when I was 15 and trained by the old guys, which
Exactly.
you were supposed to just tell the story.
Right. Exactly.
And
What
give
are
the
the
facts.
facts? Yeah.
Yeah. Now you wrote a book called Manchurian Journalist
Right.
or Manchurian Journalism.
The Manchurian Journalist.
Manchurian Journalist. Uh, give me a little insight on that book. Or
Well, it was an interesting situation. I had been doing freelancing and no investigative reporting, and I had a long history doing investigative reporting, and I got an opportunity to do a little investigative work for an obscure magazine called Freedom that turned out to be owned by the Church of Scientology. And one of the things they asked me to take a look at was the media coverage of the church because they contended it was biased and it had not been they had not been treated fairly in the media. And of course, about that time, Lawrence Wright, who's from Texas, there in Austin, wrote a book about the church, Going Clear, which became a movie with Alex Gibney. So,
yeah.
in the course of talking with them, I started taking a look at Lawrence Wright's book, and I discovered some concerns about the church's coverage and some concerns about how he had covered the church in his book. But as I dug into it, I discovered something about Lawrence Wright that led me down a path, an investigative path into a place I never expected to go, which led all the way to the Cold War, the formation of the CIA, and efforts by um, people involved in journalism and outside of journalism in powerful positions to influence what Americans read and perspectives. And um, it turned into a really fascinating journey. And I tracked Lawrence Wright's own involvement through programs that have been developed after the Cold War to recruit people with the proper ideologies into major publishing, into newspapers, into magazines, that sort of thing. And
Wow.
that's basically what the Manchurian Journalist takes a look at.
Wow. Well, you were messing around with some powerful people.
Well, a lot of it was history,
Yeah.
and it required a deep dive. But I did that investigation the way I do investigations, the way I've always done them. I gathered as much information as I could. I tried to understand what was going on. I looked at the time frames and and I found it really fascinating to discover that powerful individuals who were very active in the legal community and the banking community had the ability to help set foreign policy, but were never out front about it. They
Yeah.
they were helping to craft intelligence programs within the U.S. domestically that I think they believed helped protect democracy, helped protect the country during the Cold War and on into the war on terror. But these systems are not transparent. They're not visible to the American public. And when you have journalists who have certain loyalties that are not disclosed, it raises concerns about independent journalism. How
Yeah.
independent is our journalism? And where are these things that are going on we don't see?
Well, I don't know, what's your take today on on the media, on journalism? Um, I mean, some people think it's just so corrupt and biased. Do you agree or
I think
disagree?
that there is a new sort of perspective on what is news that has evolved with the internet and with the changes in journalism. Journalism has always had its corrupt element and the corruption is maybe not as purposeful as it is neglectful. The there have always been in regional newspapers and in newspapers across the country, there were always the sacred cows. You didn't want to write stories about the local car dealership that bought a full page ad every week. You didn't want to lacerate the grocery store owner who
Yeah.
bought double full pages and double trucks of advertising.
Yeah.
But for the most part, if it happened, it was reportable. There Over the course of my career, I ran into political situations on more than one occasion where there were pressures not to publish, and I understood the difficulties that exist, but I really didn't see the kinds of manipulation of media until I got into writing the Manchurian Journalist and into researching it. The the We have used journalism in very beneficial ways, and it's extremely important. Without good journalism, there is no democracy,
Yeah.
and without democracy, there is no journalism. So they're very codependent on each other, and the basics of reporting, just keeping track of a community. Newspapers being a place of record where you can go back and take a look at what happened uh, in times before to help you make informed decisions about things. We're losing all of that. And that's a certain corruption, if you will. But there has also been myth making in journalism. I'm working on a book and I've finished writing it, but it's about the myth of Al Capone.
Okay.
And in our history and in our mythology, Al Capone is the guy that ran the Chicago mob. Well, in truth, he never ran the Chicago mob. He was muscle for the Chicago mob, but the mob was run by a Russian Jew named Jake Guzik, who was a brilliant businessman,
Yeah.
and he survived Prohibition and took the mob into gambling and other things. And it's a fascinating story.
Huh.
And my sources were people who were actually in organized crime in Chicago, who knew this individual, who worked for people who worked for him, including his own son, who was in his 80s when I interviewed him. But the newspapers at the time, yellow journalism of the 20s and 30s, Capone was accessible, and he
Yeah.
liked to talk to the press, and the press
Yeah.
made him the
Kind of
kingmaker,
the front man, the
the
kingmaker, huh?
front man. Yeah,
Along with Elliot Ness, on the other
exactly.
side, the other side of the coin.
Yeah, yeah, Frank Nitti.
So,
Yeah,
and that was a lot of myth, also, wasn't it?
yeah, it was. There was a lot of myth in that.
Yeah.
And so, as I was researching that book and writing it, Mo Annenberg's name came up. Mo Annenberg, the School of Journalism at
Yeah.
USC, the Annenberg School. Well, he was a partner of Jake Guzik, and together they established a racing wire service that served gamblers across the country. So he
Yeah.
had his connections and his
Yeah.
influence as well.
Yeah. And you've also written a book called Street Talk.
Yes. Yeah.
Uh,
It's
give
actually a
us,
collection of newspaper columns that I did in a little town, Fort Wayne, Indiana,
Yeah.
in the 1980s, and shared a Pulitzer there with other staff members of the paper. But it includes those stories that I was writing, those columns that I was writing over a 7-year period. I had I did journalism a little differently than a lot of people. I really wasn't interested in covering city council and
Yeah.
the governor's office too much, but I like to write about common people and in their everyday lives, and that's what Street Talk is about. It's a collection of columns. There's a story there on the shooting of Vernon Jordan. There was an attempted assassination in Fort Wayne of the civil rights leader in 1980, 81, I believe, and it just so happened that I knew well the woman that he was with when he was shot, and so I was interviewed by the FBI as a potential suspect in the case, and of course I took the occasion to write about how the FBI interviews potential suspects.
Yeah, I'd be fascinated to hear about some of that.
Yeah, yeah. So I've had a lot of fun.
Was it a little? Did they approach you on or handle you roughly or
No,
gently?
no, not really. They did a pretty efficient, thorough job.
Yeah.
But at the end, the agent said, "Well, is there, any questions? You're a journalist. Are there any questions we haven't asked you?" I said, "Well, you haven't asked me if I did it." And he said, "Did you?" I said, "Well, no. You got more work to do."
uh, a moment of levity.
A moment of,
Fortunately, that would have been funny. Anyway, funny scenarios there. Yeah, there was some mob boss's daughter, and she wrote about. I can't remember her name right now, but she said that her dad, from the time she could remember, always said, "Honey, always remember, never talk to the FBI."
well, some of those people I knew in Chicago had that same attitude.
Yeah, yeah. Well, apparently a number of people in politics have that attitude now,
They do.
especially especially on the conservative side, right?
That's right.
Um, well, you've spent a little time in Colorado on I guess one or more newspapers.
Well, I did a little freelancing for the Denver Post. I worked in Denver until the last major story I covered was the Columbine massacre, and I did an investigation into the police handling of Columbine. It was an interesting story. I had managed to lose a little favor with one of the editors at the paper, and they had decided to send me to the state legislature to cover the legislature instead of doing investigative reporting. And not my kind of assignment, but it was all right. A lot of
Yeah.
people like that sort of job. But when Columbine happened, they brought everybody into the newsroom to help with coverage except me. I was, still a little bit in disfavor. So I didn't get a call the first, second, or third day after the shootings. And then the city editor called me and he said, "We have a problem and we need some help." I said, "What's the problem?" He said, "We let police beats slide over the last few years and we have no sources in the Jefferson County Sheriff's Department. And we can't reach anybody. They won't answer their phone. The Denver Post is beating us right and left because they still have a police reporter." I
Yeah.
said, "What do you want me to do?" He said, "We can't even find out who's running the investigation. Could you just find out who's running the investigation?" I said, "Okay, give me a few minutes." So a couple of years before, I had done an investigation into an attempt by Jesse Gaddis out of Florida, the taxi king, to take over Yellow Cab in Denver.
Yeah.
And he'd had some organized crime ties, and I'd taken a hard look at the taxi industry there and discovered that there was some gun running going on using taxis. And so I developed sources in the underground gun community at the time. And I started calling all those sources. And I finally hit a confidential informant who had worked with the Jefferson County Sheriff's Department. And I asked him if he knew what the cops were looking for. And he said, "Well, they're trying to find out where the guns came from, of course." And I said, "Any insights?" And he said, "I think you'll find that the guns came from the same place as a weapon that was used to kill a sheriff's deputy 2 years ago.
Wow.
So I found the name of the officer who investigated that case. I called his phone, of course, got voicemail. I
Yeah.
left a message saying I wanted to know where the weapon came from that was used to kill Officer Mossbrucker. And about 15 minutes later, I got a call from John Kickbush. He was running the Columbine investigation. He said, "You left this message and I want to know why." I said, "Meet me for coffee and I'll tell you." And after that, I was on the inside of the Columbine investigation for the next 5 months.
Wow.
So it was those kinds of things. Those are lessons you learn in journalism about how to build sources, how to use those sources, how to depend on them when you've got real important reporting to do. And
Yeah.
those are some of the lessons that have gotten away from us.
Well, some of your reporting, and I believe your book is used in some journalism schools as an
Well,
example of good journalism.
I hope so. I've taught at Indiana University School of Journalism for a little while I was also working for the Indianapolis Star, and I taught in Metro State in Denver for a while when I was at the Rocky. And I think there's journalism schools are struggling as well. They can't find jobs in the traditional press for reporters. We're probably channeling them off into public relations and other things, but I think it's really important to keep that system alive, and
Yeah. Yeah.
hopefully we're going to find a way to rebuild the journalistic structure so that we can get back to the kind of reporting that helps us make decisions.
How do you feel about the way they're teaching journalism in journalism schools today?
Well, I think it's a tremendous challenge to to absorb the changes that have occurred in the business and find ways to encourage reporting. I am seeing some things that I think are encouraging. There are programs that providing funds for uh, journalists in the academic community, people who are teaching, to also do some investigative reporting of their own in their own states, and I think those programs look promising. The funding, as long as it's independent, and as long as there's an opportunity to publish in ways that get attention, I think that can be valuable. But I don't know that some of the old school people are still around that can teach things that people need to understand about the differences between opinion and perspective and accurate factual reporting.
Yeah. Yeah. Is that a fault of the journalism schools?
I think there's been a kind of a status quo in journalism schools to, basically accept the same ideas that the rest of us tend to accept about what journalism is and what it has been. I mean, there's a lot of us. I note in the book there's a lot in journalism's history that's not very pretty, and we newspapers used to advertise slave auctions, and there has been consistent racism supported in the journalistic community. Even when I started, you did not see many African American reporters. You didn't see as many women reporters.
Yeah.
That changed over time for the better. Um, but it's still, I think some of those old ideas are still with us and still burdensome to us.
What advice would you give to a young journalist starting out today after receiving a shared Pulitzer Prize? I mean, that's the top, right?
Well, I do think there's still opportunities. There are places to publish. It's harder than it was. You don't have the same institutional structure that can carry you. So, but anybody can be a journalist if they care about what they're doing, they care about what they're writing about, and they care enough to be accurate and fair, and can find an outlet for their work. I think there should be more of us out there. There should be more opportunities to write about local communities and local issues. The so much of our news today seems to be nationally focused. And we hear stories that are shocking to us on a national basis, but we're not hearing stories that are regional and local. We're losing those things.
Yeah.
We're we're not we're not learning about our communities the way we used to
Yeah.
when we had regular daily reporting that people looked at.
That's where you got to have reporters who go out and go out in the field and on the
Exactly.
streets like you did,
Yeah.
and in the local areas. Yeah, you're right. It's happening in very few places.
Yeah.
I do know of some, but it's not like it was.
No. No. It's
Uh,
sort.
of course, with the internet, anybody can be a journalist.
That's right. That's right. It's the trouble is we don't have the supervision or
The gatekeepers.
the gatekeepers exactly that help establish a standard of what
Yeah.
is fair and what is accurate.
Well, let me ask you, yeah, because I get this question all the time, and I'm sure you do too. Just ordinary people and friends say, knowing that that I'm in the media, and
Mhm.
as you are, saying, hey, well, where do I go to find the real story? Who do I watch? Who do I listen to? Who do I read? What's your answer?
Well, I don't think there's one place to go anymore. I don't think. I think you've got to do your own homework, and that takes more time. You
But
know,
how do you
I
do
think.
that? How do you do that?
Well, I think you can look for papers that are reporting on certain stories. I track individual stories through numerous reporting outlets if I'm interested in the story, and
Yeah,
I see who's reporting what, and I try to make up my own mind as to what I'm being told because
yeah,
not everything I'm sure is level on the playing field. So I think that's one way to do it. You There's still a lot of journalism I trust, and I think you can fairly well assess what's being reported by the way it's being. There are always I appreciate people's passion on the left and on the right for what they believe. I more appreciate the idea that um, they stick to the facts, that
yeah,
they stick to what's real,
yeah,
and that we identify what's a distortion and misinformation, and we try to report through it. I think it's a harder job now in many ways because in the old days, you never reported that someone was a liar. You never
yeah,
reported that, you might report that they told a lie, or you might report what they said and what the facts show, which I
yeah.
think is a better way to approach it. But we characterize now. Then that characterization becomes the fact rather than the objective information.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Overall, just our dialogue and I guess our treatment of each other, instead of going to a higher level, it seems to be baser than it used
Yeah.
to be. Because you didn't hear one politician calling another one a liar
No.
back in the old days. And they just throw these terms about. A lot of times it's absolutely not true, but they just throw it
Right.
out there, you know?
And then it becomes meaningless because
Yeah.
you cease to know what is what.
It's like, I think it was Dick Gagarian. I don't know, maybe I have him confused with another lawyer, but he used to say that, as a lawyer, you throw a skunk into the jury box and the judge would pull the skunk out and say, ignore the skunk, but the smell was still there.
That's right. That's right.
And seems like there's a lot of lawyer tactics used in politics and I guess in journalism today also.
I think there are. Well, I mean, it's a complex world out there. I worry about the rule of law and what we see as the major dependence that we have is on the justice system working the way it was designed to work and to be fair and balanced. And it's the job of journalists to look over the shoulder of what's going on and to report on it. And we're losing the over the shoulder look. We're losing the watchdogs.
Yeah,
And the watchdogs that still exist. The pressure is to take a position, to assume that you know what is right or wrong. Doesn't work. For me, it doesn't work. I may come to conclusions, and I think it's fair to come to conclusions if you base them on factual reporting and you say what that reporting is and you point to the sources where it came from. That works. The rest of it is just a little more confusion.
Yeah. Well, I'm about to head to the Republican Convention 2024 and to the Democratic National Convention. Any advice on interviewing politicians?
Wear a helmet.
Beautiful. Geez. Well, I'm planning on just especially presidential potential candidates in the future being. I want to be sure to check out their golf handicap scores after the debate.
Well, that'll tell you a lot.
Yeah, that'll tell you a lot. Hey, listen, I really enjoyed talking with you, Dan.
Well, enjoyed talking with you, John. Thanks for having me on. I appreciate it.
Yeah, well, hope we can touch base in the future and maybe go over some specific issues that arrive in the news and get your take on it.
Absolutely. I'd love to do that. That'd be wonderful.
Thank you. Take care.
Thank you very much.
Bye-bye.
And good luck at the conventions.
Thank you.